Hey everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going on a really fascinating journey to figure out who exactly sits in the driver's seat of the state. Because whether you realize it or not, the way a government's executive branch is structured impacts practically every aspect of public policy, law, and order. We're going to unpack the entire spectrum of power, exploring the wildly different ways countries all around the world choose to concentrate or distribute their highest levels of authority. Okay, let's dive into this roadmap. We'll track the spectrum of power concentration across different constitutional traditions by hitting these 6 points. 1, the executive branch defined. 2, the presidential system. 3, the semi-presidential system. 4, the plural executive. 5, the totalitarian system. And finally, 6, balancing leadership and accountability.
All right, Section 1, the executive branch defined. Before we can really compare these systems, we've got to understand our baseline.
So, what exactly are we talking about when we say the executive? Well, think of the executive branch as the actual engine of the state. A legislature might draw up the map by writing the laws, right? But the executive is the organ of government responsible for actually implementing those laws. It administers the state on a day-to-day basis, maintains law and order, and directs the overall trajectory of public policy. It's an immense amount of authority. And what's so deeply fascinating is that different constitutional systems organize this exact same authority in vastly different ways.
Let's look at Section 2, the presidential system. This is our first stop on the spectrum of power, built entirely on separation and independence. In this model, the president holds a dual role. They are both the head of state and the head of government. They're elected for a fixed term, meaning they have a set amount of time in office, and, crucially, they are constitutionally independent of the legislature. So the crucial point is that in the presidential system, power is vested in one independent leader, inherently tied to a broader framework of checks and balances. The executive branch just doesn't answer directly to the legislative branch for its day-to-day survival. The United States is the classic textbook example here, utilizing those robust checks and balances to keep that singular executive power from overreaching. Moving on to Section 3, the semi-presidential system. You see, not all systems keep the executive so rigidly isolated from the legislature. As we slide further along our spectrum, we find a middle ground, and this brilliantly illustrates the contrast. We're looking at a clear shift from a singular, independent leader in the presidential model to a system where executive authority is distinctly and purposely shared between a president and a prime minister. So how does this shared dynamic actually play out in practice? Well, in a semi-presidential executive, you have a directly elected president, but you also have a prime minister. And here's the key distinction. That prime minister is responsible to the parliament. So executive authority is quite literally split. It's shared between a president who answers to the voters and a prime minister who must maintain the confidence of the legislative body. France represents the absolute best-known model of this framework, carefully balancing a powerful presidency with parliamentary accountability. Section 4, the plural executive. Let's move to and see how this builds into a system that completely redefines the very idea of an executive leader. What if the executive isn't one person, or even a shared duo? Notice the shift from the number 1, right? In this system, we move entirely away from the concept of one leader to several individuals. This is the plural executive, where the fundamental concept of authority is stripped away from any one individual and made entirely 100% collective. In a plural executive, power is exercised collectively by several individuals who make decisions as a unified body. They share the immense responsibilities of the state equally among themselves. There's no single chief who outranks everybody else, which ensures no single person can just dominate the state's agenda. Switzerland's Federal Council is the leading example here. It showcases a highly distributed, consensus-driven form of executive power that is just totally unique when you compare it to the highly individualized systems we just looked at. Section 5, the totalitarian system. Now, we are pivoting to the absolute extreme end of the power spectrum. We have to ask a very serious question here. What happens when power is entirely concentrated? What actually happens to the organ of government and to the state itself when the executive authority we defined earlier becomes completely absolute, with zero separation or collective distribution? Totalitarianism occurs when power is concentrated solely in one leader or within one single political party. In this model, the executive branch doesn't just implement policy or administer the state, it entirely consumes and dominates the political system. There are no checks, no balances, and absolutely no shared authority. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the objective historical reality of how this level of concentration functions. By definition, in a totalitarian system, there is zero accountability. Political opposition is entirely suppressed, and the civil liberties of the population are strictly restricted. The state's power is absolute. Historical examples of this framework include Nazi Germany and fascist Italy, both demonstrating systems where the executive branch held total unchecked dominance over every single facet of government and society.
Section 6, Balancing Leadership and Accountability. Let's guide ourselves out of those extremes and look at the big picture. Having explored everything from the singular president to the distributed plural executive, how do we make sense of it all? Well, as this quote summarizes, each executive system reflects different constitutional traditions and methods of balancing effective leadership with political accountability. The entire spectrum we just explored isn't a random assortment of government types. It's ultimately a profound balancing act. Every single one of these systems is trying to solve the exact same puzzle. How do you give a government enough effective leadership to actually get things done while simultaneously remaining accountable to the people? And that is the question I want to leave you with as we wrap up this explainer. Look at your own constitutional tradition. When you look at the executive branch in your own country, where does it fall on this spectrum? How effectively do you think your government balances the sheer power to lead with the absolute necessity of being accountable? It is a question that defines the true nature of power in our everyday lives. Thank you so much for joining me today to explore the forms of executive government. Keep asking questions and keep exploring the structures that shape our world.